Good morning, everyone. I'm Polly. This is Patty.
Hey everybody, how you doing?
Patty.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's quiet in the office today.
There's only two of us
It's just
today,
us, just us, you and me.
which is quite nice.
Perfect
For a
conditions
change.
for a webinar.
Yeah, for sure. So if you guys are new to Streamtime and to our webinars, I'm Polly. I work in customer success team alongside Patty. Both Patty and I, we deal with creative agencies on a daily basis, trying to understand their needs and problems, and we're obviously trying to solve those problems creatively.
Yeah, understanding what the problems are and coming up with new ways to kind of solve them. One of the advantages of Streamtime is its flexibility, allowing you to solve problems in new ways, which is cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're constantly learning from our clients and from ourselves as well.
Yeah, it's great.
Cool. So this session is all about numbers and us explaining those numbers to you. So this webinar is designed for us to explain in simple terms the essential numbers for profitability reporting. So as your business owner or project manager, account manager, or finance manager, you would need to generate specific reports and look at specific numbers in Streamtime in order to understand how the jobs are tracking, how your business is going. And here today we thought it's a good idea to look at those numbers and explain them in a very easy terms so you guys can understand what we mean, how do we calculate them.
Totally.
And hopefully uncover some more valuable business insights for you.
Totally. And one of the things, we hear sometimes is that it's easy to get turned off by numbers if you don't understand where they're coming from and if they don't make any sense to you.
Yeah.
So this session's designed to kind of bridge that gap to get some context and understanding around the numbers in Streamtime, get you confident in what those numbers mean and where they come from and how you can kind of get them providing you with value and meaning for your business, because that's what they're all there for. They're all designed to give you information about what's happening in the studio.
Yeah, for sure. Essentially, we want you to run a healthier and more profitable business. So it's good to understand the numbers that Streamtime provides. So who should watch this session? Who should find this session useful? I would say business owners is the biggest thing. Project managers, because you do work with numbers on a daily basis. Finance managers and account managers, since you are going to report on all your jobs and its profitability. So in short, everyone who works with numbers in Streamtime.
If you're working with costs and profitability of projects, then this session's really essential. If you're working in Streamtime, looking at those figures. So what are we going to cover today, Polly?
All right, so we will start on focusing on the JCR, the job cost report. So every single job has a JCR, and that's where most of the numbers are kept. So we're going to focus on that for the majority of the session. Yep. Then we will look at the profit margin figure and the job plan, the job page. That's the newest release. Well, not newest release. That's recent release.
Yeah.
Where we project your profit margin and look at the actual profit margin as well. We just briefly talk about how we calculate that and what are the thinking behind it.
Exactly, yeah.
And lastly, we're going to talk about a budget variance figure. Actually, not lastly. There's one more thing to talk about, which is super exciting. So the budget variance figure, there's something that we cover at the end. And
finally, the last thing we'll be running through today is a quick update in Streamtime. So this morning we pushed a new release in terms of functionality throughout the product. So we'll do a quick recap on what that new functionality is at the end of the session. So if you're keen to see some new things that you can do in Streamtime, hang around till the end there.
It's super exciting.
Slipped out this morning, so we'll be covering it later. So
a bit of housekeeping.
Let's do it. Great one. Hey, Andy.
Hi, Andy. Oh,
Andy's
cool.
our boss.
Yeah, and he's so far away. It's quite late there for you, Andy. All right, so welcome everyone. Please feel free to say hi, introduce yourself, where you come from, what your roles are. just don't be shy and use that chat functionality to talk to each other as well. If you've got any questions, please just feel free to send them through as you go. We will cover them at the end of the session as well.
Yeah.
There is a specific dedicated area of questions there for you. So yeah, should we start?
Let's do it. Let's dive into a job cost report. So we're going to go straight into the kind of denser reporting side of things today, everybody. But before we kind of do open up a job cost report, one thing we just want to chat about before that is the costs in Streamtime, and just kind of laying the ground for what we're about to see. So we know how to plan a job. We do that all from this area here. We can plan it with sell rates and, plan expenses on the job. But when we're talking about costs, things that are getting tracked here, Polly, where are those figures coming from?
Yeah, so you could find your costs from time that your team tracks time on within the job, and your expenses. So expenses are your third-party suppliers that you're working with, your freelancers or external contractors. Essentially, that's the cost to your business. And when it comes to time, every team member will have their own cost rate as well. So every time they track time, it costs your business as well. So we take time cost and expense cost into consideration when looking at the job cost report.
Awesome. So we'll come to the create button at the top here to find the option to create our job cost report. And the best thing about this job cost report is that you can generate it at any point throughout a project. It's designed to give you value at the start of a project, looking at things that you're planning and estimating some costs, but also retrospectively as well. So let's say this job's about to wrap up. We want to see where it's currently at. So we can pull this and have multiple versions of this report at any point in time if we're kind of saving these in a folder of the job.
Awesome. So the JCR is broken down into three sections at the beginning of the report. So you could see how the job has been planned, the grayish area, and how it's tracking, and how is it tracking at a glance. So those are the little charts that you can compare your profit margins and actual profit margins and used and planned costs. So if you look at how the job has been planned, the first thing we look at is the budget. So where do we take the budget from?
So the budget comes from the job page. When we create a new job, we have the option to drop in a budget. That's good for when you're kind of planning out a job. You kind of have a rough guide as to what you're hoping to make this job, what is the value of the job. But once you send a quote to a client and that client approves the quote, we'll actually replace whatever budget you've set with the approved amount of the quote. And if you have multiple quotes, we'll just accumulate all of those approved quotes together. The reason we do that is because that's an agreed amount from the client. It's what you're expecting to get paid at the end of the job. And so we kind of set that as a figure of truth when it comes to the job and what you're expecting to make at the end of the day. So depending on whether or not you're having those quotes approved by the client or even doing it yourselves, that budget may or may not be set by yourself or by the client, but sits at the top of the job page, and we do kind of treat it as a figure of truth, what we're really working towards. So when we're looking at planned figures, we kind of use the budget instead of this invoiced amount when we're looking to kind of predict costs and profit on the job. Now, looking at the total planned cost here, did you want to touch on that?
I did want to say that budget is essential. So setting a budget is very important, even though maybe you don't know, you haven't issued a quote yet, that's okay. You could simply just add a budget within the job page as a free text field, because as Patty said, we look at the budget figure when it comes to forecasting and predicting those profit margin. So it's important to set it up at the beginning.
Exactly. So moving on to the total planned cost here, this is quite simply just the planned cost of all time and expenses that have been added to the job so far. So that includes planned time. So on our items, when we plan time, we add team members to those items because we think we know who's going to work on them. Now, if you don't have any team members assigned to those items, then we're unable to actually estimate a cost that might kind of be incurred there, just due to the fact that all the costs when it comes to time are related to the people that are working on those 100%. Things. So those people need cost rates set. and they need to be added to those items in order to get some figures here, some value out of this total planned cost. It doesn't have to be certain that that person will work on it. It's more just a guide to get some information in here. It's an estimation.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's ambiguous at the start, but we want a rough ballpark idea for how much this might cost us. And of course, we're including expenses in this figure too. So third-party costs, whether it's contractors, freelancers, or printers that we're using, we can account for those in here as well once we add them to the job.
Yeah, for sure. Once again, if you wanted to see how you've planned a job, if you've planned a profitable job, so it's essential to add your expenses and your team members under those items so we can then calculate and predict that total planned costs. Total planned cell, self-explanatory really, that's the cell of all time and expenses that you've planned for this job. Essentially that's how much this job is sellable for. And planned profit margin figure. So planned profit margin is us predicting a profit margin for you based on the budget. So once again, setting a budget figure is crucial. So when we calculate the planned profit margin figure, we take the budget and we take the budget and we minus all the total planned costs, and then express as a percentage as well.
Exactly. It's the difference between these two boxes at the top. So that 11,000 minus that 19,000.
Yeah.
And we will touch on this planned profit margin again in a little bit when we kind of return to it on the job page. We'll go through this one in a bit more depth, but in short, this is how it's being calculated. Now let's move on to the how things are tracking column, Polly.
Awesome. So the first thing is invoiced amount. So we take that figure from your invoices. So all your invoices that you've generated.
And that's all invoices, including drafts.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. All the invoices.
Stole your thunder.
No, it's good. And then total use cost, also self-explanatory. That's all the used time and expenses within the job so far. As we said at the beginning, you could generate this report at any stage of the project. So the total use cost figure will change more. Your team will be tracking time and more expenses will be used as well.
Exactly.
Total use sell, this is how much you're selling the used time and expenses for. And the profit margin. Where do we get the profit margin figure there, Patty?
The profit margin is the invoiced amount minus the total used cost of the job. So over here, we were looking at the planned cost, taking the planned cost off the budget. Here, we're taking the used cost off what's been invoiced. So these are actuals, they've been realized. Profit margin is showing us what profit is actually been made here. And that's based on the fact that these invoices we're taking those for the fact that, that much is coming into the bank, and therefore we can compare this cost to that amount and call this profit.
Yeah, and if the job hasn't been completed, so this profit margin figure is in progress as well.
Yeah.
So you could generate a JCR at the end of the project. Once all your items have been completed, then you will see an actual profit margin figure.
Exactly.
And the profit margin versus budget. So this is the second figure that we predict in a way. We look at the budget figure again, and we think if the budget is to be invoiced now, what is the profit margin today? Looking at the actual costs, total planned cost.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like bridging the gap between a hypothetical and an actual. If the amount that the client agreed to was to be paid today, how much profit would we be making on the job? So if you are kind of at a position where maybe you could stop work or you could kind of present to client, that might be useful there. And comparing that to what was initially planned is also just interesting here. And we kind of give you that comparison on the right-hand side over here, which just is a helpful visualization of those figures.
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
should we scroll down?
Let's scroll down. What's happening next?
So this is quite an extensive report. So the first page obviously shows you everything at a glance. However, if you're a numbers person, you want to dig deeper, you could find all the information around the job in the job cost report. So when you scroll down, you could see all your quotes that got approved in this case, all the invoices that got generated. You could see them, they're all draft invoices in this case, but we still take them into consideration on the top of the page. And then if you scroll further, Patty, we look at the items that we've created and team members assigned to them. And then in detail, we break down this information into the time that's been planned per team member, how much time has been tracked by that team member, and how those items relate to actual profit margin too. So it's a very good report to have if you deal with numbers on a daily basis, but it's essential to understand what those figures are. That's why we're having this chart, because
Totally. And you can kind of see within here the difference of a few different instances of these items, I suppose. Looking at this concept development up the top here, this is actually an instance where there has been no planned time. I can see that the planned hours are sitting at nil at the moment, but we've actually used 6 hours of this time. That's gone against Polly there. So it's showing us where we might not have accounted for a cost, but currently there is a cost being absorbed. This design item down here is showing us an instance where we've actually planned hours at the team member level. So Andy and Patty have each individually have different amounts of time planned for them. And we're able to kind of compare the estimated costs of those team members on this particular item and then what's been used. So I can also see that Patty's the only one that's tracked time here. I'm referring to myself in the third person. That's fine. And as you scroll down the bottom here, we can actually see, oh, well, Polly has had 10 hours assigned to her. But perhaps up here, there's an instance where there's been a bucket of 50 hours planned for all of these team members. So instead of having them individually, having had set individual planned hours for them, we've said, okay, here's 50 hours, you guys can all hack away at this together. One other thing I can notice about this is that Sarah here is the only person in this list without a cost rate assigned. That is a kind of red flag for me. I want to go and set up a cost rate for her to ensure that she's factored into profitability calculations and figures when we're trying to estimate costs here. So that's something to keep an eye out for too.
for sure. And the expenses on the very bottom. So you could see that we've used freelancer for this job. So Kate, the designer, she worked on the project. And we've added cost and sell rate there straight away, and you could see that we've got 28% of the profit margin, planned profit margin for that expense. So all your expenses within the job need to be added as you go. So it's essential because you will then be able to understand your actual profit margin and how your job is tracking.
Now, there is a question here before we leave the JCR.
Cool.
Are you done on the JCR?
I am.
Yeah, cool. So we'll go back up to the top. There's a question here just asking to explain again the calculation between of this figure here, the profit margin versus the budget. So this figure takes the profit margin, which we can see here. That's the profit margin is all invoiced amounts on the job minus the total used cost. So this figure is showing us this 17,150, taking away the total used cost here, the 10,433.75, giving us 39% profit margin of about $6,700. Now the profit margin versus the budget takes that $6,716 and compares it with this 19,155 up the top here. Going back to the thinking around that budget figure is something that we've agreed with the client because they've approved our quotes. That's where that figure is being drawn from. And so the use of this figure is showing us that if everything that we agreed with the client was to be invoiced now, currently there's a $2,000 difference between these two figures, which we can kind of see represented here. So if we invoiced everything that we'd budgeted or everything that the client had agreed to, but stopped working today, what would be the profit that we could potentially realize on this job.
So essentially, on the JCR, there are three figures. There's planned profit margin figure, there's profit margin versus budget figure, and a profit margin figure. The first two are essentially us predicting and helping you with that, estimating that profit margin. And the actual profit margin figure is based on the actual time and expenses used and actual invoices created. That's the profit margin figure. That's in progress if the job is still going.
Exactly. And we're explaining all of these figures here in this webinar for you. But if it's still confusing, if you're still a little bit lost, we do have a little key down the bottom corner here which actually explains some of the more complex figures that we've been digging into. And that links out to a help article as well that goes into a really dense report of all of these figures. So you shouldn't be without if you're still a little bit lost or just want to touch base on it later. So that's the JCR. Thanks, Andy, for jumping in and getting back to Holly. We pulled this one from the Create button in the job page, and we'll head back to the job page now.
And we're going to look at the planned and projected profit margin figure within the job plan itself.
Exactly.
So Patty, this
that JCR came from just here, Holly.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. There we go. Yeah.
So this projected profit margin figure on the job plan is quite new. We've only released it a few months ago as we wanted to help you as a business owner or project manager. You want to see how your job is tracking at a glance without generating a JCR. So what is the thinking behind profit margin figure?
Yes, so these figures are relatively new. They've even got a beta stamp on them because we are still just testing and tweaking the algorithm, but the thinking behind these figures is in line with our kind of broader philosophy that we kind of, that's embedded in the to-do screen about planning ahead and looking at foresight rather than hindsight. So we're trying to encourage you to plan jobs and think about the potential profit or at least costs on jobs ahead of time when they're being planned, rather than when it's too late, when it's retrospective. Obviously, it's important to have both. These figures aren't necessarily easy things to pull. They require on you having the correct data in the correct place, or at least making sure you understand how to kind of use different data points in Streamtime to get effective value out of this algorithm. But with this in mind, they're designed to give you a sense check on how well you're doing, whether or not you're running close to what you had planned. That's kind of the difference between these two things. Did you plan for enough profit to start with? And are you going to finish ahead of the game, or are you going to be running to catch up? So breaking these down, the planned profit margin, we have already touched on this, but just quickly recapping, it's based on your job plan. So everything that we've kind of got set up on this page, the planned profit margin shows you what profit you have planned to make according to the total cost of all items and expenses versus the planned sell of all items and expenses as well. So this is expressed as a percentage of your planned profit against your planned revenue. If we hover over here, we'll see where those figures are kind of being drawn from in this little tooltip. So it's taking the budget and it's minusing the total planned cost, which are the planned hours and expenses cost. And some things to note about this planned profit margin figure is that if you've set a budget, anything between the total planned sell amount of the job and the budget will be added or subtracted from your profit. So for example, let's say you've been given a $50,000 budget for a job by a client, but your total planned sell is $40,000. In this instance, we can kind of compare the difference between the 15,000 and the 19,000 here. We'll assume that the difference between these two figures, so that $4,000, is pure profit. And similarly, if the total planned sell is actually more than the budget, so if these two figures were reversed and we've got a budget that's less than our planned amount, we'll actually adjust the planned profit figure to show that too.
Yep. And also, if you've got some items that haven't got any team members assigned, or the fixed fee items, we actually don't take them into consideration, as we mentioned at the very beginning at the JCR, just because it's we would need to know the actual cost rates of an individual to take that into consideration when calculating the predicted profit margin for you. And to keep the calculations as accurate as possible, your planned profit margin will only appear if Streamtime is able to estimate a cost for 90% of your job. So if we won't be able to do that, we won't display that figure.
Exactly. Moving on to the projected figure. So this projected profit margin figure is designed to show you how our system might predict your profit margin will end up at the end of the job. And it's calculated using a combination of the planned profit margin figures with updates on the used cost of items and expenses as the team tracks time, and using item statuses to kind of factor in and weigh on this as well.
Yep.
So for example, once an item is marked as complete, we update the calculation for the projected profit margin to assume that the figures for those items are locked in due to the fact that it's complete. This Discover, for example, would be locked in given that it's complete. Let's say this project management, we mark that as complete too. That will now factor in to the projected profit margin figures, and we can see that it's changed there. Mm-hmm. And another thing that's changed as well is the confidence too. Yep. Touch on that in a second. So unless we know the real cost and profit of an item, we will work with your planned figures. Your expenses are also included here too, and because they're hard figures, we assume that they're locked in from the get-go. Mm-hmm. Now, as you mark your items as complete, the confidence of the projected profit margin figure will increase, or the confidence of it. So once the job's over 50% complete, the confidence will shift from low to medium, as we see here.
Yeah.
And regardless of the item statuses, if your team logs more hours than what were initially planned, we'll switch to tracking those used hours instead. We consider those truth, those things that have actually happened. And this is just so that the figure's taking into account that you're running over your planned hours. Something you should be wary of.
And once all your items get completed and you've generated invoices for that job, we will showcase an actual profit margin for you instead of projected profit margin, as we assume the job actually has been completed and we take the actual figures into consideration. There are a few things to keep in mind to have those profit margin figures as accurate as possible. So what are they? So first of all, as you mentioned already, it's important to make sure all your team members have the cost rates allocated to them when you are planning a job and when you are allocating them under items, as sometimes we don't take items into consideration when the team member hasn't been allocated to an item. Mm-hmm. And cost rates are important. It's important to understand how important is to complete your items as you go, because we then take that into consideration when looking at actual figures, actual projected profit margin, and the confidence, as Patty said.
Yeah, but it's not just here that will have a positive impact. Those statuses have been designed to impact your Streamtime account positively in other areas, like people's to-do screens, help cleaning up the work that they're actively working on. So yeah, it's just generally good practice to keep those statuses, keep on top of those statuses as well.
For sure. And your expenses, it's crucial to track them as you go and record them straight away so you don't forget anything. And then this projected figure is actual, as accurate as possible for you.
And at the end of the day, the system's only as good as the data you put into it, so making sure that the team's actually tracking time is going to be pretty critical in that one too. Now, I'll just drop an article into the chat here, which links through to a help article on pretty much what we've just broken down, these two figures, a dense kind of and comprehensive explanation of where those figures are coming from and what they mean, if you just want to go and recap on those two. So one last figure to kind of wrap up before we sink further into some other things is the budget variance. And this one will only take a quick second to kind of get our heads around. It's pretty simple, but often forgotten.
That's true, actually.
And the budget variance lives here. You won't actually see it elsewhere in the product. We surface it in the jobs list here. Do you want to explain quickly what the budget variance is telling us?
It's essentially, in simple terms, it shows you how far above or under budget your job is sitting at. So you can then understand whether you need to improve or how the job is going at a glance. So this budget variance figure can be found in the jobs screen, and you could just quickly turn on that column in your columns when creating a budget report or when creating a WIP report. And then you can go into filters and perhaps filter out all the jobs that are with a budget variance figure that is greater than 0 to see what are the jobs that actually need to be worked on still.
Or in this instance, it's which jobs went over budget.
Went over budget as well. Yeah, exactly.
Now, the thing with the budget variance is that it's actually being used, it's being calculated with a comparison of the budget and the total the total used to sell on the jobs. So based on all of the costs or all of the used time and expenses that have been added to the job, what are they currently sellable for versus what have we promised with the client? So it's not actually an indicator that you've blown you're losing profit. It's possible that you could be over the budget but still be making profit on this job, but it's going to be getting thinner and thinner by the day. So it's good to just flag that and keep an eye on these jobs. So it's not necessarily the end of the world unless the instance is where you've gone maybe this much over the budget, which isn't great, especially when the budget was that. But yeah, good to keep an eye on this and have it set up as a favorite as well that you can come and return to quickly and easily. Now, we've hit 30 minutes, but let's quickly touch on today's release poll.
Yeah, sounds good. So this release is pretty big one for us. I've been waiting for this, those improvements for ages. So we've looked at the priorities area of Streamtime, Kanban style boards, where we've released a couple of improvements to those boards. So first of all, you can now, I'm very happy to announce that, you could now shift your columns within the priority boards and make changes to those boards however you like. So you can move the whole entire column around. How good is that?
It's crazy.
With just a simple click and drag. This is amazing. What else can you do there?
In the name of kind of collaboration, we've introduced the ability to add a note to these boards as well.
Yeah.
So I can create a card and pick a note card here. Now this can be literally anything based on what sort of a board I've got set up. This note could be related to a project, it could be related to a client, it could be anything, or it could even just be a personal reminder of things that I need to do. So maybe this is my shopping list, for example. So you can just free type into these, you can add lines and you can tab out to quickly save it. And then we've even introduced the ability to add checklist items here as well. So I've got a shopping list here as my kind of note, and I'm gonna need some oranges, apples, avos, bananas, and quickly just jot these down. Yeah, but we work in other people in the office do. I personally am not the biggest banana fan, but that's fine. So just a quick place to kind of jot those down and check things off and just have that. One other thing we can do in here is add URLs. So for example, I should be able to drop that help article here and I can see this here, and that's actually a clickable link that I can now go and find elsewhere.
Awesome. You could now duplicate your priority board. So in order to duplicate a board, you can click on a 3-dot menu. That's the first time we introduced the 3-dot menu in the priority board.
There you go.
So you could duplicate the board and choose what you like to duplicate, of course, rename it, and duplicate it. Happy days.
Exactly.
Which is a huge improvement for us. And if you look at all boards for your team, you can now see who has modified a board and who has created that board as well.
Yeah. So we tell you when it was last modified and by which team member. So if you are looking boards across the studio, we can see these down here. So that's it. There we go. Andy's just touched on the fact that those links are really good for showing where files are in Drive and Dropbox. So those note cards are now really useful for collaboration and working on projects across the studio, and needing to find things. So yeah, thanks for
Super
touching that
exciting.
one up, Andy, as well. Now, that's it. We've gone a little bit over.
Do we have any questions there, Paddy? All good?
No.
All right.
Thanks, Holly.
Holly.
No other questions. It seems like
It's a good
that's
thing.
always a good sign. We'll take that one.
All right.
But thanks, everybody,
Thanks,
for
guys.
tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Paddy.
Okay. Thanks, Paul. All right. Bye.